Welcome, everybody, to the PWZ podcast. Today, we've had a very special guest returning, Vinny Berry, author of Pro Wrestling Vault 1 and 2, and the Lance by Chance, Lance von Erich biography, and of Wrestleville.com and Wrestleville Podcast. Vinny has been here before. We've talked about his many books, but yeah, man, he's got a brand new book on the horizon. So let's talk, Vinny. How are you today?
I'm doing very well. Busy. I've been busy.
Yeah, I see that. You're pumping out the podcast. You are working hard to promote not only the Pro Wrestling Vault Volume 2, but you're really trying to push out those books, man. I'm telling you, and you've got some great projects on the horizon. So, yeah, congratulations on your new book.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm really proud of it. And, I'm excited when I sell like any of my books, like, when I sell Lance and stuff like that. But boy, when I put these Pro Wrestling Vaults in the envelope and send them off and take them down to the post office, I have to tell you, man, I'm pretty proud because, it's like they really are my babies. It was my idea. I interviewed all these wrestlers. I wrote all these individual short stories and put them all together. The cover's my design. The picture layouts I've done myself. So it really is a passion project, and it's something I'm really, really proud of.
Why don't we talk about how, I know we talked about it when we did Volume 1. Why don't we talk about how the project itself came up for the short story books based on the wrestlers?
Yeah, well, I was ready to do another project. I kind of thought that I wanted to do something based on the pandemic and what everybody was going through in the wrestling world. Mm-hmm. I had reached out to about 5 or 6 promotions across the United States, and I was just kind of hitting a roadblock with that. Like, it really wasn't working out. And I was talking to Kenny Casanova, mm-hmm. And he was like, well, dude, how many stories do you have? Why don't you, before you ever lose those, why don't you preserve those and put those in a book? Mm-hmm. And so I did. And I didn't want a book being over 400 pages, so I decided I was going to break it up. And I guess for the second volume, I only had maybe 25 or 30, mm-hmm. maybe 20. It wasn't very many. It was about 20, 25, 26. And so I had some interviews on my podcast, because that year too, I just started my podcast. This was right after Lance von Erich. I started my podcast. So I took some, I did the interviews for my podcast, but I interviewed them individually. Uh-huh. So the stories that are in the book, only for about 10 of them are different than what's on the podcast. They're right. Like tailor-made stories for the book themselves. All except one, and that's Saraya Knight. That is transcribed for what's on the podcast. It's put in the book, but I could not put Saraya Knight in the book. I mean, she's a legend, right?
Right.
But one neat thing that did come out of this was somebody got me in touch. They knew I was looking for promotions, and by the time I had abandoned that idea, somebody told me to reach out to the Northern Wrestling Federation, and I did. And I started talking to Roger Ruffin, and I did a story on his promotion and his career and kind of how he got started in the wrestling business. And he had trained Monster Abyss and Jordan Clearwater and Jillian Hall and Chris Harris and Carl Anderson. So wow. He had a really pretty interesting story, and I wanted to capture that and put that in the book, and right. That was a really neat thing that came out of the idea that kind of fell apart,
Right. In the first volume, you had some really great stories. I'm going to run across a couple of them because some of them are my favorites before we hit Volume 2, which is obviously we're here to talk about Volume 2. But Yeah. Because, I mean, you had Damian Wayne, who, to me, he's an independent legend. You know, he had some time in TNA. He had some time working the independents all over. And he's a very well-known guy. I think that he's really awesome. There's Tim Storm, former NWA World Champion. Bobby Fulton is there, who from the Fantastics. I mean, if you don't know who Bobby Fulton is, you know what I mean? What are you doing? So, you know, there's just, let's see, I'm going through the list here. Sorry. James Beard, legendary referee and promoter. Tracy Smothers, who we lost not so long ago, probably, a couple of years ago. Another NWA World Champion, Mike Rapata, Chase Owens, Chris Michaels. I mean, how can I forget this? Harley Race is in this book. You know what I mean? So this book is just, and that's not to mention all the other talents in here that, you know, you can buy this for the story of maybe Ricky Morton, Harley Race, Bobby Fulton, Tracy Smothers. There's Bushwacker Luke and C.W. Anderson, but you're going to be able to read about so many other wrestlers that you may not know about. You know what I mean? And go ahead.
It's definitely going to be like a educational experience, you know? And
yeah.
I mean, if you love wrestling as much as we do, you know, those guys have stories too. Some of those guys have been on the independent scene for, 20 years and never made it to the big stage, you know? So,
yeah.
It wasn't because they weren't good,
Right.
Alan Steele's in there, and I don't know if you've ever watched Alan Steele wrestle, but that guy is brilliant.
No, I'm not familiar, but I'm going to have to look him up. But,
yeah, he is fun to watch, man. He really knows what he's doing. And, like you said, there's 3 former NWA champions in that book. There's 5 former NWA champions in that book, the junior champions. 5,
right.
So 5 junior NWA former champions and then 3 NWA champions. And the book is kind of a tribute to the NWA. There are several pictures of former NWA champions, got their title dates in there and stuff. I had the pictures. I wanted to use them. And then also too, then in the middle, there's like 400 pictures that cover the independent scene, and some are from Starcade conventions. A lot of them are from the Gulf Coast independent scene. So you'll really be surprised who you see in there. And like I said in the book, that book is a celebration of pro wrestling,
right.
And I really think that that it captures that statement really well.
I love reading the history of professional wrestling, or just about professional wrestling in general, and I love learning about stuff that I don't necessarily know about. Especially, you're from Texas, I'm from Connecticut. I grew up watching wrestling from Texas on ESPN every day with World Class, so it's kind of I guess obsessed with it, I guess you could say. World Class was my favorite promotion, and I've seen obviously other promotions from that area, so it's just very awesome to be able to learn. I mean, your books don't necessarily just cover Texas. There's a lot of wrestling from all over the
Sure.
United, actually internationally, really, because your podcast, you did. Didn't you just interview somebody from England? Was that?
I recently did somebody from Scotland.
Scotland.
With TJ Rage,
right?
And Luke King Sharp, also from Scotland, but
okay.
A lot of those wrestlers, they wrestle in ICW and Insane Championship Wrestling.
Right.
And Molly Spartan, she's from Scotland. So a lot of people from Scotland. But yes, I had Saraya Knight on there, and I had her husband on there. Also had who else did I have on there? But yeah, I mean, yeah, they're from the United Kingdom, that area. If you say, hey, can I say you're from the United Kingdom? They say, don't you say I'm from United Kingdom. You better tell them I'm from Scotland. So I don't know all the GR.
There's lingo. Yeah. I mean, I guess there's there might be some heat,
lingo.
I guess. Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, they're, what, they're fun. Man, when you watch them wrestle, the wrestling over there is alive and kicking, man. And I thought, um, you know, there's people over here that don't know wrestlers over there and vice versa. And, my thing is, I'm kind of, I'm not following or covering all the people who are on the big stage. I'm really kind of turning over the rocks, so to speak, and
Right.
I mean, I'm finding some people who are kind of like running under, flying under the radar a little bit, but
Yep.
they really should be.
You're giving them a platform that they could expose themselves
Absolutely.
with either your book, the podcast. You're writing articles on a lot of these people on Wrestleville.com. So one of my favorite interviews that you've done recently was Jocelyn Navarro.
Yes.
Yeah, and I thought that was a fantastic interview. Fantastic. I learned a lot about a wrestler that I really knew nothing about. You know what I mean? And I've become a fan since.
Yeah. Oh, she's fun to watch, man.
Yeah.
She's definitely fun to watch. Very physical, physical wrestler. Also too, Isaiah Broner. I don't know if you listened to that, but boy, he's very physical. You should look him up. I've been watching Pretty Boy Smooth, Ninja Mac. Do you know anything about Ninja Mac?
Oh yeah, I've seen him several times. I think he made some prior to it closing down initially. Wasn't he? Didn't he make some Ring of Honor appearances here and there?
I don't know if it was well, he's from Reality of Wrestling. He's done some local wrestling in Houston. He's in Nowhere right now. Man, the guy's tearing it up. And talk about fun to watch.
I've definitely seen him in Noah. Now that you mentioned that, I forgot. I've watched quite a bit in the last month. Seeing that, I guess it was last night. Now, Muda was preparing for his retirement match, so I've seen Ninja Mac quite a bit on there because I've been watching the shows that Muda's been a part of. Have you been keeping up on Muda at all?
Just a little bit about what I read online.
Yeah. Yeah, I watched the match. I haven't watched the match with him. I guess it was, I don't know, because of the time difference. I guess it just happened. I'm going to have to go back and watch it at some point. But I did watch the match with Muda and Shinsuke Nakamura, which I thought was a fantastic matchup, man. I thought it was great.
Oh, I bet. I didn't see it, but both those guys are first class,
Yeah. So like you said, you're not necessarily you're watching a lot of stuff under the radar, not necessarily into the mainstream. And I think that it's kind of where I'm going over the last few months. You know what I mean? I'm just how do you feel about wrestling in the mainstream at this point? If you don't,
I've been dipping my toe into NXT. I watch NXT.
Yeah.
I've been watching the Insane Championship Wrestling. So I mean, I would imagine that's mainstream over there, right?
Maybe where they are, not over here for sure.
But for us, it's still kind of under the radar. I like what I read. You know what? There's so much content out there to watch. I mean, I wouldn't get any writing done if I was trying to watch all the wrestling. So I do follow a lot of individual people. Like I said, I've been watching Isaiah Broner. I've been watching Jocelyn Navarro. A lot of the people that I've interviewed of late are the people that I've been watching a lot. I've been watching. Do you know who Kid Bandit is?
I know the name. I've seen.
I've been watching Kid Bandit.
They've actually worked a show up here last September that I went to. So, it was in a brewery. There was like a random indie show. So, it was it was the first time I've ever seen them.
For 1 year in the business, Kid Bandit's pretty good. I like the look. I like the style.
Yeah.
It'll be fun to see Kid Bandit grow as a wrestler going down the road.
Let's see. You interviewed Jazz for your second book, but was that an interview that had been laying for a while, or was that?
Yeah, I've had that story for a little while.
Right.
And it did view on my website, and then when I transferred, when I guess I got a new look or a new model or whatever you want to call it, for my website. There's a lot of stories that came down, and that was one of them.
One of the wrestlers that I'm interested that you interviewed because he had passed away in the last year was beautiful Bobby Eaton. So tell me about your experiences talking to him and whatnot, because literally this is a guy that I watched growing up in the various incarnations of the Midnight Express, whether it be World Class or NWA and then later WCW. He was absolutely one of my favorite professional wrestlers of all time. Definitely top 5 or top 10, whichever. He's had so many great matches. I mean, do you remember his feud with Ric Flair in probably 1991? Maybe was it? This was just a guy that was probably one of the most underrated professional wrestlers of all time. What are your experiences talking to him and getting to know him a little bit for this book?
Well, he was a genuine dude. I mean, seriously, he was super nice. A friend of his, I went through a friend of his to help me set up the interview. His friend gave me the number and said, yeah, he's expecting your call. I called, and he was like on a road trip one day. I guess they were, maybe they were going to a match. It sounded like they were traveling together. And he was real nice. He just said, hey man, I'm in a car with a couple guys right now. We're driving down the road. How about you call me on this day? And I said, okay. So I had called him on that day, and we talked for about 15 minutes. And then he said, hey man, I just remembered that I have to do something. I can't remember. Something came up, or he had to pick up his wife, or he had to go something. Something like that. And I was like, okay. And I thought, you know what? I'm probably not going to hear from him again. And he called me up a day or two later, a couple days, and said, hey, when can we schedule this? We made a time. And sure enough, he called me whenever he said he was going to call me. Yeah. And I appreciate that, because dude, I've been covering combative sports since 2011.
Really? That long?
Yeah. Boxing and MMA. And then in 2017, I switched fully to pro wrestling.
You don't mind me? Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well,
and then
I'll just finish my thought, and then
sure.
But my experience has shown if you don't get the interview then and there, you're probably not going to get it.
Trust me, I know as a podcaster reaching out to a lot of interviews. Trust me, I know. My thing is, I think that you spoke previously about covering boxing and the MMA, but you switched fully into wrestling in 2017. Tell me about your days in boxing and wrestling, and then what made you decide in 2017 to move towards professional wrestling? I know you were a fan as a child or as a kid, because we spoke of this in previous episodes, but you don't touch boxing and wrestling, or excuse me, boxing and MMA today at all. And is that 2017 the birth of Wrestleville, or did you?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Go if you don't mind me starting there with the boxing and MMA into the Wrestleville.
Yeah, not a problem. So when I moved down to South Texas in 2010, I met these guys. I don't know, around that time. These guys in my town, that covered boxing and MMA, and they had websites, and they invited me. They were telling me what they're doing. I said, oh, that sounds really, really good. And I told them, I said, hey, I have some amateur boxing experience, and I've done some writing. So, I mean, I can help you guys cover the boxing, but I was like, I don't want to do the MMA, because I don't know much about MMA.
Right.
And they were like, yeah, sure. No problem. So I started going with these guys, and I think my very first story was an MMA feature story. Like, I did a feature story on an MMA fighter, and they took me to the MMA matches too, because down here they had several promotions. And when I say down here, in South Texas, so
Mm-hmm.
I'm in the Rio Grande Valley. So we're talking Brownsville, McAllen, Edinburgh,
Right.
So they had a lot of, events down here.
Right. Was there like casino or like arenas, or do you have
They
like
were like
stuff like?
arenas
Yeah,
or ballrooms and stuff like that.
gotcha.
And
Yeah.
so I did that for a guy for about a year. The day he closed the day he said, "I'm shutting down my website," I was like, "Dude, why are you doing this?" And he was like, "I just can't deal with it anymore," So he shut it down. About an hour later, I got a phone call and someone said, "Hey, I heard so and so shut down their website." I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Well, what are you doing?" I said, "Well, I guess I'm not doing anything." He goes, "Dude, be my writer." And they basically started a website up. We had a website running in 3 days, and I was cranking out material for them, and I did that. And then me and him, we did a magazine that covered boxing and MMA. Was different stories of what we were doing on,
Mm-hmm.
And it was like a newspaper magazine that we were selling ads for and stuff. We were basically breaking even. We were getting just enough money to print the magazine.
Doing that as an independent is almost impossible, to make money at, because it's there's people writing. You might have to pay them. You might have freelancers helping out and such. So
we got
there's
no sleep, bro.
there's a lot that goes into it, and you're lucky if you make anything at all. Like, trust me, I know, man, it's really hard.
Yeah. So to just fast forward a little bit, there was me and the guy that were doing that. It was just kind of like, I don't know, for some reason I just kind of saw the writing on the wall that me and him were just kind of have different ideas of doing things.
Right.
And I just said, "Hey man, I'm just kind of done," And about 3 weeks later, a promoter called me out of the blue and was like, "Hey man, what is it gonna take to get you on my payroll? Do my PR. Help my sister do the PR, but do all the stories for the website." And I was like, "Yeah, sure." So we made out a deal or whatever. In about 6 months, I was that guy's matchmaker.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, because what would happen was, like, my boss would call me and say, "Well, we just lost the challenger for the, and this would be like days before the title fight. He goes, "We just lost the challenger for the 145 title." And I was like, "Well, dude, why don't you call this guy?" And he goes, "Well,
Right.
who's that guy?" I said, "That guy's ranked number 4 in the state, man." He goes, "Well, how do you know this?" And I said, "Because I cover MMA in the state of Texas."
It's your job to know this stuff.
I said, "Dude," and before you knew it, I got replaced as the matchmaker. And I will tell you this: you talk about trial by fire, man. I really had to learn what a matchmaker does, how to set up the all that stuff, and work with the commission and stuff like that. And it was, the week of the fight was just really not fun, because you're dealing with people can't get their weight right, and people are dropping out at the last minute, and the fighter or the promoter doesn't want to drop the fight, so you're looking for a fight, and it was a headache. And so when he ended up, then the promotion started drying up, and then when he did that, I was just kind of idle for a while, and I just told my wife, I said, "You know what?" I said, "I really miss writing," and she says, "Well, write about whatever you want to, but you do it. You be your own man. Don't be doing it for everybody else and helping these people and those. You do your idea and you do it." And that's how Wrestleville came about.
And that's 2017. You started it as a website?
I started as a website, yes.
Okay, that's pretty amazing. What was the first thing that you wrote about, if you could remember anything? I mean, this is kind of interesting how it came about to me.
Wardo Walker.
Okay, who's in? Is it? It's in the first book.
He's
In the first book, yeah, it's one of the first things listed in the table of contents. Right, I have it right here. The second book, interviewing someone that just left the National Wrestling Alliance and is going to probably appear up in the NWA, or excuse me, NXT sometime soon. Colby Corino.
Oh yeah.
How was that?
Yeah, that was a few years back. He was a nice guy, you know. He was when I talked to him, he was really at the turning point in his career. You know, that he had, he kind of had some, immature troubles, and
I got you. Yeah.
And he it was like the turning point of his career. And I just thought he was a really down to earth good guy, and I saw a lot of promise in him. And obviously, look at him. I think he's an amazing heel.
I never knew much about him. I knew, obviously I watched his father quite a bit over the years, whether it be ECW, Ring of Honor, and some independents, but it was a bit of a short period where I didn't watch wrestling, I guess, when maybe Colby had joined the world of professional wrestling. So I never really got into that, I guess, until he appeared in the NWA. When I got back into wrestling, I'd have to say about 4 years now. So we're in 2023, maybe 5 years. So I was out for about 2 to 3 years because after my divorce from my first wife, I just kind of lost interest in a lot of things for a few years, 2 to 3 years in life in general, really. But when I started watching, there's this whole new crop of wrestling. The indies were hot. There was a lot going on. I was like, who the hell is this? What's going on here? It was actually when I first started dating my second wife, and her son was really into WWE at the time. And I started watching WWE again at that time period, not so much now. But then I started taking him to some local independent shows. And I'm like, man, I just fully got back into the world of professional wrestling, and I absolutely loved it. I was like, man, I miss this so much. And probably within about 2 years' time, I started up this podcast here, But then I started, I heard rumblings about Colby. I read about him, didn't see him until he actually popped up in the NWA. And I was like, damn, I've been missing out. This guy is good.
Yeah.
I think I saw him in one match prior to the NWA against Homicide in maybe in Capital Wrestling or Catalyst Wrestling, one of those independents out of the Northeast. But it was a very good match, and I think that he's like one of the, I think that he can go really far in NXT and maybe WWE as a whole.
Oh, well, you got to remember that kid, and I think he talks about it in that article, is that he's been wrestling since he was like 5 years old, 10 years old, or whatever, because he was with his dad, and so you're talking about a young man who's been around it all his life.
Right.
And, I mean, I think the sky's the limit for him, because he's just that's what I would call a natural, right? I mean, he's just been around it. And good for him. I mean, he is, wrestling definitely needs young men like him, because he's going to be one of those guys. If he stays healthy and stays wrestling, he's going to be one of those guys like, hey, man, this is how it's done. This is why we do this. This is, he's going to be one of those pillars. That's what I see him as.
He's going to be a good mentor to a lot of people as he gets older.
He's a good mentor now.
Yeah. One of the things I'm most interested in, I read this in your book, and I was very excited because I'm a huge fan of this guy. Going back to my childhood all the way, and still to this day, I even bought the shirt, watched him appearing on the Savoldi's TV show, AWA TV show. Not so long ago, he appeared on AEW, but the legendary Bill Apter.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So what was that like?
You know what? He's a good guy. We it was just, he was eager to do it, but yeah, it was one of those surreal moments, when he had called me back. It was like I thought to myself, damn, I'm talking to Bill Apter.
Yep.
It was a big deal for me, because I was reading his stories when I was a kid.
I'm still going back. I have boxes and boxes of old wrestling magazines that just the other day I was in this office here, just going through those boxes and pulling them out, and just every so often I'll just start going through them and reading random articles or reading old results from the 1980s into the 1990s. The guy is a legend, and he did so much for wrestling magazines. I've heard him on numerous podcasts lately that his story is literally a fantastic story about how he got involved in professional wrestling. It's amazing.
And his book's amazing too. Matter of
I
fact,
have it.
I read his book, and when I read his book, that was what inspired me that the short story ideas could work.
Right. His books, he says in the beginning of the book, it's not necessarily an autobiography or whatever. It's literally he's going to tell random stories in each chapter. Just, this is what I did here. Next chapter could be 40 years later.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's an incredible book. It's a lot of fun to read. It really is, because there's you can read a story from, what is it? I think he said he started in 1968 or something to that effect. He did a little radio show, then moved on to the magazines, and then taking pictures at MSG, and all of a sudden you can get stories from that era, the 60s, or into the 70s, and you can get a random story from the 90s or the early 2000s and go bounce back to the 1980s. It's just it's really all over the place, but it's such it's not boring, and it's a fantastic book. That guy's career, I listened to him on Brian Solomon's Shut Up and Wrestle podcast recently, and it's just, the guy has such an incredible story and history in professional wrestling, man, and some of the decisions he made to move his career forward, working in different organizations. So it's like, it's time to leave the Pro Wrestling Illustrated, family of magazines, to move to WOW or to move to One Wrestling or what have you. So it's just an amazing story.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to point about the Volume 2, the Pro Wrestling Volume 2, that, it's just not wrestlers, like you said. Bill Apter's in it. I have Bryce Bordeaux, who is a wrestling announcer. I have John Paul LeBlanc, who is a photographer. I have Marc Lowrance, who was the announcer for World Class Championship Wrestling. So there is a little variety. Chaz Moretti, who is an independent wrestling manager, he's in this book. But you're going to find people in here, Nikita Knight. I don't know if you recognize Nikita Knight, but she's Thea Hale in NXT.
Okay.
And so, she's got a very interesting story. She grew up being a very competitive gymnast. She was a competitive cheerleader. And when those two things came to an end, she told her dad, like, hey, it's time to do pro wrestling. He was like, what? This is what we're doing now? But you know what? Look, she was wrestling like 3 months, if that, maybe 6, and NXT picked her up. I mean, to me, that's incredible.
For somebody at that level, an independent level, to be wrestling that long in something like NXT to pick you up, that you have to be a natural, and you have to be actually been working very hard, because you're being brought into the big league. Is absolutely. The WWE is the be all end all, I guess, if you for lack of a better term, and that's, I don't care who you are. I'm just gonna say it. That's every aspiring professional wrestler's dream, is to go to WWE. You can lie and say it's not, but I'd have to say a good 99% of the people out there trying to get into the wrestling business is your goal is WWE, because that is the biggest game. It's the biggest show in town. You know what I mean? So to be picked up by WWE that early on, that's amazing.
Oh, that's amazing. But you got to remember too, for a long time that was the only stage. Now it's not the only stage anymore.
Well, things have changed
Yeah,
in professional
absolutely.
wrestling since, I mean, you or I were watching as kids. After, say, WCW closed, like you said, the only game in town was WWE. And there wasn't many other options. There was TNA, but how many times, if you're an independent wrestler, do you have a chance of making a career in TNA? Because they were pushing a lot of named guys, if you think about it.
Right.
Yeah,
And I wanted to, if I could, I wanted to
of
name off
course.
some of the names or read off some of the names that are in this book. And this isn't all of them, but these are some of the highlights. We got a Congo Kong in here. We got Lalane Kai. We have Duke the Dumpster Drosy. He's in this book.
Former PWZ guest Duke the Dumpster. He was on here
Yes.
really early on.
And for some of the listeners up in your neck of the woods, the name Sheldon Goldberg might ring a bell.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. He's a New England guy, a New England promoter. Before he continued, a legendary New England promoter. He was associated with the NWA for a while. He promoted New England Championship Wrestling, which they promoted a bunch of shows in my town that I live in, that I attended for quite some time. I got to see a lot of legends, future legends, I guess you could say, in his promotion. And Sheldon's a great guy. If not only was he a promoter, but the guy is a historian of professional wrestling. And he's been, if you ever watch those old 90s like wrestling TV documentaries and stuff like that, there's some that I believe is an A&E or what have you. Like he had appeared in those.
Wow.
Yeah. So go ahead, Vinny.
Blake Christian's in this book. Cody Diener is in this book. Yep. Kamala, the Ugandan Giant. Scott Casey. I got, let's see, the Maestro. Rob Kellum is in this book. Dante Smiley. Mario Mancini. Jeremiah.
I know that guy.
Phil Collier. Kerry Morton. Thunder Rosa. Justin Credible. Susan Tex Green. So Matty Rinkowski. Saraya Knight, as we mentioned earlier. Andrew Anderson. So I mean, there are some names in this book, and I think it is really something that every wrestling enthusiast is going to enjoy. And these are first-hand account stories. I'm not making this stuff up. I interviewed every single one of these people and wrote down what they said, wrote their story and put it in words.
Well, like I said, you interviewed somebody that I know very well, Mario Mancini. Great guy, great professional wrestler. The guy has some amazing stories. He really does have some great stories. I don't know how long your actual interview with him was, or how long you actually talked to him, but anytime I see him, which is probably once a month, maybe twice a month, I could see him, and if I have any questions for him, I got some great stories. Literally, I can get any great stories about any legend in the WWE from that era.
Yeah, I have an interview of him on my podcast, and I have the story that I wrote about him in the book. And like I said, they're different. The one on the podcast is, it's more of a conversation, and he's telling me some stories of some, people and things that happened and whatnot. And, kind of like, I guess, like road stories or behind the scenes stories. But in the book, he talks about just kind of like his journey through wrestling. And, I remember right after the book got printed, I was reading the book, and my wife saw me reading the book. She goes, You're reading the book? I said, well, I'm reading the story about Mario Mancini. She was like, again? And you had to read all those stories probably 30 or 40 times, because that's the process.
Not for nothing, but you're a writer, which means you're an artist. So you always kind of probably have like an obsessive nature a little bit, trying to make sure that your work after it's been distributed is proper, right? I'd assume.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's not always.
I'm sure, like you, like a lot of times I'll go back and do something, and I'm listening to this. Like sometimes I'm just like, I wonder if that came out right. You know, so
But I told my wife, I said, you know what? That story about Mario Mancini, that's really good.
Yeah. He's got some great stories, man.
Absolutely.
When it's talking about him and Tony Altamore or what have you, there's always something interesting. You can ask him about. I still have to bring him back on for a second appearance because I'm sitting here like I didn't even get to all my questions the time that I interviewed him because I'm like, I want to get through the asking about certain guys and whether he liked them or anything that, certain stories. I just know that he had great stories with Greg Valentine, great stories with David Schultz. And if, there's some just awesome stories. He's a good storyteller on top of it.
Oh, absolutely. And one thing I want to say about this book, what is a little different about the first Pro Wrestling Vault, that the picture gallery in this book really pertains to the people that are in this book.
Mm-hmm.
And the picture gallery in the other book is a collection of independent promotions. Again, like I said, mainly from the Gulf Coast region. Right. There's other places in there as well. But they're like a collection of the independent promotions, as again, where these pertain to the people that are in this book. And there's a couple pictures in here, and some of these wrestlers have a couple pages, like Mario Mancini has a couple pages of pictures in this book. Jazz does. I think Saraya Knight does. PJ Black does. So, some of the wrestlers that have been around for a long time have, like extra photos in there.
I just opened it up, and here I see a bloody picture of Jeremiah Plunkett, current NWA star.
Yeah.
Tell me about talking to him, because I'm a huge fan of his. I think that he is a terribly underrated star. I know I use that word underrated for certain wrestlers, but this kid, watching him on NWA each week, I think that he's not nearly getting the push that he deserves. I think that he is very old school and just a great wrestler when he comes out there, man. I just think that this guy should be pushed way further.
Yeah, I agree with you. And you know what? I don't know why that is that, some people get the push and some, I can't tell you. I just don't.
So, you guys like you and I are very old school. I feel like we prefer a different style maybe. And so obviously somebody like Billy Corgan I think he's just going to push different people,
Yeah, I mean, it's good to see him on TV. It's good to see him where he is. I mean, he's been wrestling for a long time.
Yeah.
So for him to be doing what he's doing now, and it's funny is because I believe in that story he talks about that he bought his last pair of boots. He bought his last he's done spandex.
Yeah.
And or singlet or whatever you want to call it. And he was about to hang it up and things turned around for him. So I was really glad for that, because you never know what's waiting for you around the corner. You really don't.
Yeah. There's Jeremiah Plunkett. There's Kerry Morton, who's also currently on the NWA television, son of Ricky Morton. Too. Yeah, Sal Renaro. At this time, you probably interviewed him beforehand, but Kerry is the current NWA Junior Heavyweight Champion. I've seen him quite a bit going around defending the title on various independents, which is great. The Maestro Rob Kellum, who's from WCW. He actually worked in USWA and Smoky Mountain as well. I interviewed him probably 3 years ago by now. Another great guy, man, and he has a really great history when it comes to professional wrestling.
Yeah, and you can say he's underrated as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
seriously.
Yeah.
And and in that story it talks about him being related, that he's the nephew of Gorgeous
the original Gorgeous George. The first time I ever saw Rob Kellum was on a USWA show. He was named Gorgeous George III. Now,
right.
when I saw that, I kind of laughed. Mind you, I was probably 18 years old, maybe at the time, so I didn't know him. And then I didn't see him again for maybe another few years on WCW TV. You know what I mean? So I was like, oh shit, it's that guy. Gorgeous George III. And then when I interviewed him and was doing research, he actually informed me that he was the nephew, or was it nephew of the original Gorgeous George? Yeah.
I believe it's nephew. Yeah.
Yeah. So, which I found amazing. You know, I just thought it was great. But he's another great guy. He has a very interesting story, a long career, and he's still going at it today.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
There's another one I wanted to ask you about here. Where is it? Marc Lowrance. Tell me about talking to Marc Lowrance. Legendary world-class announcer. After world-class, he worked with USWA for a little bit when they were still based in Texas or working in Texas out of the Sportatorium. And then he just left when USWA left Texas.
Well, he's a minister. Did you know that?
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. And so, very interesting, very matter of fact. I mean, that guy is just, you know?
Yeah.
I talked to him like 30 minutes, and I reached out to him and wanted to ask him about some things in world class. Wanted to ask him. This was why when I was working on the book, the Lance Von Erich book, and I was talking to him, and I told him what I wanted to talk to him about, and he called me up, and I asked him some hard questions, you know, because I mean, Gino, you know, died of an overdose, and you know that's what it came out, and you know, guys committed suicide over there. And I mean, so a lot of tragedy happened in there. So I talked to him about that, and he talked to me. And then I said, hey, I'd like to ask you a couple questions. I wanted to do like a question and answer with you. And I got down to the last question, and he was like, okay, I have to go to another meeting. I said, can I ask you this? And I asked him something else, and he answered and goes, thank you very much. I do have to go. And that was it. You know, he was very, he was very polite. He was very nice. But he seemed guarded in the fact that he kind of wanted to be careful in how he worded things, you know? That was my impression. I could be wrong, but.
Did you put that on your podcast at all, or was it just exclusive to the book?
It was exclusive to the book.
Okay. I've seen two other interviews or heard two other interviews with him outside of this. One was on the Steve Austin podcast, and one was on the Hannibal podcast, which I think the Hannibal one. And to watch him on the Hannibal podcast, because that one was, you know, camera based, and it was very interesting, and he was very open to answering a lot of questions on that, I thought.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, of course, yours might have been before that. I don't know. I think it's funny because he was out of the business for like 30 years or something to that fact. And then all of a sudden in the last like few years, I've come across 3 current interviews. I don't think that he was really interested in the world of professional wrestling after he left it.
Right. No,
at least much.
I think that too. And I think actually when I talked to him, he was actually at his office. You know, I mean, he called me from work. So, you know, maybe he was in a situation where he really couldn't talk. But, you know, the one thing I was interested when I asked him about Kerry Von Erich, I said, were you surprised that, because this was the only one word answer. I said, were you surprised that the NWA put the belt on Kerry for only 3 weeks? He was like, no.
Yeah.
Nothing. He had nothing else to say. On everything else, he just had these long answers, you know, and that was just it kind of goes back to there was a reason why that he didn't have that title that long.
Well, there's a lot of reasons why the NWA did that. If you think about it, back then, when somebody was taking off when they want to promote somebody as the NWA World Champion, they want to take it off him, they usually have somebody there. But a lot of times, if you look at it, or back then, excuse me, they're only going to take it off for a certain amount of time. You know what I mean? It seemed like Ron Garvin held it for so long, or Dusty held it for so long, and Kerry held it for so long. It's just, I think a lot of it, to me, at least from what I gather and from what I look at, is like trying to build flair up. It seems, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but if you read the book, David Von Erich or David Manning says why they took that belt off.
Yeah,
and the reason why was that he had showed up on some of those title defenses in an unquestionable manner, and they just kind of saw the writing on the wall that he was unreliable. And
yeah, I think that's another reason why, if you see that when he was a world class champion and they were doing the Super Clash 3, if you remember that at all,
yes.
When he was world class champion and him versus Lawler to build the unified title, they just stopped it because he had been inebriated basically, and he had cut himself with a blade. So they just said, this dude's unreliable. You know what I mean?
Right.
So they just decided to do a too much blood finish. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you saw that match on the WW Network, it's in black and white. Remember?
Yeah. I still go watch that every so often. It's fun to watch some of that stuff there.
Hey, so what are your thoughts on the Von Erich movie?
That's what I was about to ask you. I'm looking forward to it personally. I am too. Me growing up a world-class fan, a Von Erich's fan, excuse me, I watched World Class every day. So I grew up, I got the Legends of World Class Championship Wrestling on ESPN every day when I got home from school at 4 p.m. Eastern time. So I'd run home every day, throw my book bag to the side and be like, do my homework later and watch World Class Wrestling. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I'm really looking forward to this Iron Claw movie. It's just very interesting that they're actually finally following through with this, because I guess there's been, what do I say here? There has been various attempts at making this movie.
Right. Well, I know of one. And what I know about this was, there was a gentleman who was on a podcast with me who was the screenwriter for, we'll call it the first version. All right.
Right.
And the host, was just like a show like this, but he said, "Hey, we got the screen writer. I want to say, I might get this guy's name wrong. I want to say it was his last name was Goldstein. I can't remember. Maybe Steve Goldstein, or I believe it.
Yeah.
But he was the screenwriter, and he wrote it with Kevin.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when I was interviewing guys for the book, and I interviewed Johnny Mantell, and Johnny Mantell was talking to me about the movie, and this was like in 2019 or 2020, whenever it was, I can't remember. It was 2020. Right. And he goes, "It's a shame that Kevin is working on the book with this guy." And I said, "Well, why you say that?" He goes, "Because the truth ain't coming out."
Yeah.
And so I don't know what happened between that time and now, right? But the movie got picked up by Sean Durkin, right? He's a producer or director from Canada.
Yes. Yep.
And so he picked up the movie, and so the movie company put the green light back on it, right? And when I started hearing that they're casting people for, Michael Hayes and Gino Hernandez and Bruiser Brody and Lance Von Erich, and I thought, you know what? This is going to be interesting, man. This is really going to be interesting, because the reason why I wanted to write the book, Lance by Chance Wrestling as a Von Erich, was because that period of world class, you could take any period, right? But that was the most pivotal I mean, because that period, what happened? What happened after that?
It was a slow decline for,
Absolutely.
I mean, God, many, they closed in 1990, was it correct? So, or maybe was it
Yeah,
89?
but
So
that
yeah.
thing disintegrated long before that, man.
It's funny that
Internally.
you're mentioning. It's funny you're mentioning that era. I've been watching at least one episode a night of 1986, and Lance is in there at that time. I'm watching it, and you're watching the arena. Now, mind you, when I'm watching
Yes.
World Class, I always look at the crowd in the Sportatorium. There's a lot of empty seats right up front.
Oh yeah.
Literally, there's a
yeah.
lot of empty seats. So it was literally like what you're saying. It was declining.
Yeah.
It was going, and I think Lance and Kevin might have been the only Von Erichs that they're in there at that period.
And at that one time in 1986, Lance was the only Von Erich.
Yeah, there's definitely a period there where he's the only because Kevin was out. Yeah, you're right. So I've been watching a lot of it lately. Going back, obviously, probably like the third or fourth time going back watching that, that period. I always go back and watch these old episodes, and yeah, man, it's a very strange era. The people that are coming in and out of there, you know what I mean? There's lots of guys that are just coming in and out. Gino Hernandez, even though he's a heel, he is majorly over with the female fans.
Oh yeah.
I mean, the females were going crazy over him. I forgot he was wrestling was it Johnny Montana, who was a
Johnny Mantel.
Nope, definitely not Johnny Mantel. Different guy.
Okay.
Yeah, it was no, I would know Johnny Mantel, trust me. So I know who that is. He was basically an enhancement talent. So he in the fans, the female fans are
it's Jobber. Mario Mancini says
all right. I always felt like I was insulting somebody using that term. So, but yeah, man, it's just Mario is very keen on using that term, jobber. But yeah, it's the female fans are going crazy over Gino. Do you think that they could have made him a babyface at one point or another?
Yeah, I mean, who knows, right? But golly, he played that heel role so well, right?
He was fantastic, yeah. And the thing was, I think it was after him and Chris Adams might have broken up because Chris Adams attacked him at the end of the match. And
yeah. But I think in that angle they were going to make Chris the baby face. I think. Who knows?
Yeah.
We'll never know, right?
I thought they were great as a tag team. I thought they were phenomenal as a tag team, dude. I mean, that era there where Chris turned heel and was teaming with him. And I loved when Gino was Texas champion. He would just yell out, "I am your champion," to the camera every time. It was just, he was a phenomenal performer. It's sad what happened to him.
Yeah.
Do you think that literally there's always been rumors and talk that he was going to be a horseman or he was going to come to the NWA or Crockett and he could have been a horseman? Do you think that he could have held his end up if he came in and was one of those guys?
Well, he was tight with Tully Blanchard.
Yeah. Well, of course he was. Yeah, they were tag team champs in Southwest.
With Tully Blanchard. So yeah. I think he could have held his end up. Absolutely. I think he could have definitely been,
up there.
Anywhere he went, he could be top tier.
Yeah. Do you think that if he hadn't passed away, do you think he could have had a WWF run? Or do you think? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's very possible. I mean, Vince was bringing in all kinds of people. He's
cherry picking the territories, basically. Still at that period.
There's really no telling what would have happened if his career didn't end as young as it did. And he was a young guy.
It's a shame we lost him at such an early age because he was an incredible performer, Gino Hernandez.
He was the guy that you love to hate.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
You also are doing the Wrestleville podcast. You've been killing it as of late, man. What's been going on with you over there in that department?
Man,
you've been pushing them out like crazy. You've been pushing them out literally. If you're not posting an article, you're posting a new podcast.
Well, I taken a break from posting articles because I can't I can't do articles and books and podcasts.
Yeah.
It's like pick two, right?
You got to be
So
an
all
adult at some
the writing
point.
I'm doing is for books right now.
Yeah.
I've got one I'm working that's kind of in the fire right now. Um, Definitely, I would say I'm about in the middle of it. I don't know what the release date is on it, but I'm excited to finish it because I was recently approached by somebody who's interested in doing a project with me. So, it's kind of motivating me to get this one done so I can, take a look at that one. So I'm doing podcasts and I'm putting about 2 out a week. Got some really good ones coming up. And I've just put out Mark Youngblood. He talked about. I have 2 on there. I have a part 1, part 2. Part 2 is he's talking about what happened the day that Bruiser Brody lost his life in Puerto Rico. I just put out TJ Rage, and I put out Lord Crew. Lord Crew is from the Northern Wrestling Federation, which is in the second.
The second book. Yep.
So, and there's a picture of Lord Crew in there. I can't remember what page it's on, but the podcasts are good. They're conversational based. They're genuine conversations. You come on my podcast, I'm going to make you sound like $1 million, because I'm interested in, what's going on in wrestling, what's going on with you, I don't care about all the dirt because it's just not my bag, man. I worked in news for 20 years. So it's like, these people have got some good stories, inspiring stories, heartwarming stories. And I'm really having a good time talking to them and getting their story out, and giving them a platform like you had said.
The Mark Youngblood interview, parts 1 and part 2, I listened to both parts, and I find them so interesting. He just lost his brother, was it last year or the year before?
It was recent, but I can't remember.
Yeah.
COVID kind of messed me up on the time.
I mean, you can't remember anything because of COVID, because it's all blurs together. But yeah, it's Chris Youngblood was, I remember them. They worked world class. They worked, I believe they worked USWA. They worked WCW. They worked Puerto Rico as the Renegade Warriors. You know what I mean? Back in the day, the 2, Mark and Chris Youngblood, obviously brother of Jay Youngblood, and all really great performers, great wrestlers. So the Mark Youngblood interview is just, I recommend anybody that's listening, if you love old school wrestling, I highly recommend going to check it out. If you love old NWA, any of that stuff that I mentioned, seriously, it's something that you should all go check out.
Mark is just an amazing guy. I started talking with him. I was introduced to him when I was working on the Lance Von Erich book, and then we just started talking to each other after that project out. I'd call him, talk to him, or he'd call me, and we talk just about, hey, what's going on, and da-da-da. And, I've been telling him, I said, look, man, he is really, when you talk about someone that's far removed from wrestling, that guy is it, man. I mean, he
knows nothing about it anymore.
Yeah, he says that I'm really his only, he said, Vinny, you're my only connection to wrestling. I said, well, that's, golly, dude.
It's pretty weird. It's funny because I reach out to guys sometimes and people are like, I don't do that anymore. Like, I'm not interested in that anymore. I'm like, all right. Like, I don't know what else to say.
But you know what? He said, yeah, I'll do an interview with you. And I didn't know what he was going to talk about. Yeah, because I know the Brody stuff was sensitive. It was sensitive to everybody, right? And so
yeah.
I didn't know what he was going to talk about. He called me that morning. We had set up a time like 4:00 in the afternoon, and he had called me that morning, and I said, "Hey man, did we get the times wrong?" He goes, "Oh no, I just got some time. I'm waiting for a delivery or something. I'm just waiting. I just thought maybe we'd talk about what we're going to talk about. Man, we talked for about 45 minutes. He's telling me all these amazing stories. I said, dude, we should be recording now. Because we can't, I guarantee you, we're not going to be able to capture lightning in a bottle twice.
Right. Yeah. I've been in that situation where sometimes you're trying to set up an interview. They say, hey, call me at this number. And then you end up sitting there talking. I'm like, damn, these are some good stories. I should have freaking pressed record.
Yeah. But you know what? We talked later that afternoon, and
yeah,
man, I tell you, it was just, I enjoyed the part one, because he's talking about wrestling, is like, how his dad got into it and how he was around it. And, people would call up his house and, he'd say, hey, Dad, Ox Baker's on the phone, or hey, Dad, it's Ivan Koloff on the phone. And, or hey, sorry, my dad's not here. It's like, whatever, it's like,
yeah,
they kind of knew, who to give access to, because his dad taught him,
Right. And the dad, of course, for anybody listening, was Rocky Romero, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Legendary professional wrestler. So, Vinny, what else do you have coming up as far as podcasting goes? And like you said, I don't know if you want to talk about books that you're working on or any projects that you have working on, but what about
Yeah, well, for interviews, I have Jock Sampson. Okay. Mm-hmm. Do you know Jock?
That I'm not familiar with. No.
Okay, he's from like the what do you call it? The Appalachian region, like West Virginia and Virginia.
Okay.
And he about a 20-year career, I believe.
Okay. I'll have to look him up.
Him coming up. I got the Russell twins. Their mentor is Elijah Burke. And I've got their interview coming up. I've got Pretty Boy Smooth. I've got Ninja Mac. And I've got one more. Off the top of them. Oh, I got one with the Grappler. And
Lynn Dent.
He's telling like these old funny road stories. And it's not really a back and forth. He's just kind of... He's sharing a few stories, and he does that. And then the book I'm working on right now is of Black Bart, and I'm hoping that'll be out in the fall of this year.
I'm glad you mentioned that Black Bart book because I know you told me about it. God knows how long ago, so I haven't revealed it at all because, well, keeping kayfabe. And when you told me that, I literally basically flipped out because I'm like, this was going to be an awesome freaking book. The guy's career is amazing.
I think it's going to be really good. I think there's going to be some stories in there when they're told that people are, whether they believe it or not, there's some stories in there that kind of things didn't work out quite the way that he had wanted them to, but he was really happy with the way that they did. And he talks about how he struggled as a jobber for years, like 7 years, man. And Dusty Rhodes, was like, look, we're going to do this, and bam. And so Dusty could have told Black Bart, hey, man, I'm going to turn you into a purple elephant, and this is going to be, and he would have said, do it,
The other thing about that is Black Bart was a former world-class world heavyweight champion as well, or pretty early on. So that's a big step right there.
Yeah, and there's
a lot of people won't remember that.
On Erich's in the book too.
Yeah, that's great there. One of the questions is you mentioned the Grappler. You've been interviewing him. Are you speaking Len Denton?
Yes.
Oh my God, I can't wait for that. That's going to be awesome. You got to put that out. So I have his autobiography, actually. I don't know if you've read that at all.
I have not read it. Me and him have been talking. He's another guy that I talk to from time to time.
Yeah.
Lynn is a genuine dude. He's a great guy. But I have not read that book. What was it that you liked about it? I'm curious.
It's great learning. See, I love to learn the history of the business and literally, I just saw it online. I was watching a virtual signing, and there was one of him, and I was like, oh damn! And I just bought a signed copy of his book right then and there because I was like, I used to watch him growing up, man. He's probably got some great stories, and his whole career is just amazing, man. It's just I love learning the history, especially watching guys and shows I used to watch as a kid, like World Class and stuff. I love learning because if you remember growing up, wrestling was not necessarily exposed. We couldn't hear these stories. We couldn't find these stories.
Right.
We just read what we read in the magazines, and that was the information we got, unless we were subscribed to things like this Observer or the Torch. You know what I mean? Which
Right.
was not a lot of people at that time period knew about that stuff. So growing up, and when I saw the book, anytime I get a really interesting book, or I'm able to get a really interesting book, it's just I take a chance, and I just go for it. And there's always interesting stories about listening, or reading about stories and learning about guys that you watched.
I'm reading a book right now. It's called The Man Behind the Makeup. It's a book about Jeff Bearden, the giant warrior who was trained by the Funks, but he wrestled in South Africa with Lance and Dusty Wolf.
Dusty
And
Wolf,
he
okay.
was a major heel over there, and he is. He's wrestled in Mexico, he's wrestled in India, he wrestled in South Africa, and he was a big star over there. Did some work here in the United States, but very little, and had a great international. Guys like 6'7" or whatever he is. He's tall dude, man. Maybe taller than that, but I'm reading his book. Very interesting. And so, yeah, when you talk about like learning the history, and look, I'm a sucker for off the beaten path, right?
Yeah, me too. Yeah, me too. Yeah.
I mean, it's like, hey, did you see Roman Reigns last night? I said no, but I watched Pretty Boy Smooth, man, and he is awesome. Like
That's me.
Who was
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. No, that's definitely me, because it's like I'll go to work and people are like, hey, did you see this on SmackDown? I'm like, no. Everybody at work knows I'm like this huge wrestling fan, but I'm like, I'm sitting here on the internet reading, say for one, not to sound like a jackass here, or an ass kisser, but Wrestleville.com. You know what I mean? Or oddball interviews that I'm not going to find on mainstream TV. You know what I mean? Or reading books that, all right, I get it. Hogan put out a book. Jericho put out a book. But guess what? I'm reading a book on the Von Erichs. I'm reading something like this. I'm reading, you know what I mean? Because I want to learn the history of the business. Stuff that I can't just pick up anywhere. Yeah. You know what I mean? I love that, and I love, obviously, growing up as a kid, I love the territory days. So one of the things about that is, it's just when I see books about certain territories, I'm just kind of get excited, or based on a wrestler from a certain territory that I didn't know had a book. I'm like, this has got to be interesting. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I just go for it.
And one thing I wanted to mention before we head out of here on these Pro Wrestling Vault books, you're talking about, in this book, there's like 45 short stories in this book.
Mm-hmm.
45, maybe 46, but you're talking short stories, and these are first-hand accounts, and they're little stories of all these people, So you don't have to commit to a big book, It's like, because, dude, I get a little daunting when it's like, oh man, a book. I was like, oh, this is refreshing in the fact that you could read 2 or 3 stories before you go to bed. You can, hey, you're on your lunch break, you can read a story or 2.
Yep.
I think the longest story in this book is the one on the Northern Wrestling Federation with Roger Ruffin, and it's probably about 10 pages. All the other ones are, 3 to 5 pages maybe, and so that's the beauty of this is that it's easy to read,
One of the things I really liked is that you featured Cowboy Scott Casey. Speaking of, we talk a lot of World Class. I know the World Class name has come up quite a bit, but you featured a lot of guys from Texas in here that had worked there. And obviously the Von Erich movie is coming out, but Scott Casey, absolute legend in the business, worked world class, worked WWE or WWF, excuse me. And yeah, man, I was excited to see that story in here. I've went through, and like you said, you could sit there, you could, if you're not, you could pick a story to read. You can go bounce back and forth and just read a story. You can read a story about somebody that you want to learn about, or you can just learn something about a guy you never knew about at all.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You can do that in this one. In the Pro Wrestling Vault Volume 1, though, what I like about that, I don't know if you noticed this when you read it, but if you read that thing from beginning to end, you'll see how those stories interweave and connect. Mm-hmm. That was really magical of how that happened. All the guys with the NWA Junior, you're talking about Barrett Brown. Here he is. He's talking about wrestling for the NWA Junior Heavyweight title, and then later in the book he won it.
Yeah.
And then also in that book, Eric Andrews talks about hey, I'm not going to give another title defense to Mr. USA because he already lost and he didn't win, and then he ended up defending his title to Mr. USA, and Mr. USA won it, and then Barrett Brown came and defeated Mr. USA. It's just kind of funny how the book also too, and then Tracy Smothers, in that book, who's the gentleman that talks about, Tracy Smothers is talking about how he's helping people. Yeah. Right. And then there's a gentleman in the book that says, yeah, Tracy Smothers helped me, Chris Michaels.
Yeah.
And so it's funny how that thing just kind of plays off each other. It almost reads like a novel.
Yeah. It's very interesting. I've suggest anybody that's a fan of professional wrestling, the history of professional wrestling, or learning about a lot of independent guys in the current state, just go and check it out, please. Vinny, let's wrap it up. We're going to wrap it up here. Why don't you give out your information as how to get in touch with you or in your social media presence?
Yeah, you can go to Wrestleville.com. That is my website, Wrestleville.com. You can get all the podcasts. You can get the books. I got some T-shirts on there as well. And I am on Instagram and Twitter, Wrestleville Podcast on Twitter, and then Wrestleville Podcasts on Instagram, and then Vincent Berry on Facebook. And also, too, there is a Wrestleville group page and a Wrestleville homepage. So there's many ways to get in touch with me out there. Please shoot me a message. My contact information also too is on the website. You can email me, and that's at WrestlevilleUSA@gmail.com.
Let's not forget, it's Wrestleville. It's where wrestling lives.